Well, that was Prime Minister Narendra Modi speaking to the Indian diaspora in the Sol Hall in Vienna, and interacting with the diaspora. The Prime Minister said that after 60 years, this same government has been given an opportunity to serve the nation continuously for the third time. That's one of the key points that the Prime Minister made, especially in a time when democracies around the world have been, where incumbent governments have been finding it difficult to hold on to their power. This is quite a record in a sense.
60 साल के बाद एक सरकार को लगातार तीसरी बार सेवा करने का अवसर भारत में मिला है.
And also the Prime Minister said that India wants continuity of good governance for working. This is with big goals. India has big goals.
ये मैंडेट इस बात का भी प्रमाण है कि भारत स्टेबिलिटी चाहता है, भारत कंटिन्यूटी चाहता है. ये कंटिन्यूटी बीते 10 साल की पॉलिसी और प्रोग्राम्स की है. ये कंटिन्यूटी गुड गवर्नेंस की है. ये कंटिन्यूटी बड़े संकल्पों के लिए समर्पित होकर के काम करने की है.
Well, let's turn to our guests who've also listened to the Prime Minister. Here in our studio, we have Deepak Bora, former senior diplomat, who's also had a history with Doordarshan, so he holds this place as his own. Ambassador Deepak Bora, Prime Minister spoke about India's values, especially pluralism, and you are wearing, an outfit from Nagaland, so that clearly shows that you understand our diversity pretty well.
India is not a melting pot, sir. And I don't even say India, I should be saying Bharat. We are a salad bowl. Everything in that bowl retains its individual flavor, whether the cucumber or the tomato or the lemon or whatever you put inside it. But that entire beautiful jewel is called India. And so when I go to the Northeast, which I love dearly, this is a Tangkul Naga shawl, and I feel very, very proud of it. I won't tell you how much it costs. I'll have to declare it to the government. But this was a gift. Absolutely adore this. Austria, on the other hand, in terms of language, they all speak German. You know that they became independent in 1955. Jawaharlal Nehru played a certain role in persuading the Soviets that please withdraw your fellows sitting over there and give them their independence, because the Austrians have sworn that they're never going to join any military alliance. As you know, they are members of the European Union but not of NATO. They can't. It's not in their constitution. So he played a role. And also, I don't know if I told you this because I'm getting old, I forget, that there was this Austrian Jesuit, I think, in the 18th century, who was in Agra, but he traveled extensively. And then he wrote about his visit to Ayodhya and to the temple where we've got the Ram Mandir now. And his testimony, his writings, was relied upon by the Supreme Court in saying, all right, Sanatan was being practiced in this place, according to this Austrian chap who wrote about it 200 years ago. So it's fascinating how these little things connect us. But the Prime Minister, sir, it's very clear from the insanely popular. This is the age of instant nanosecond transfers of information, yet, and I've seen this across the world, wherever he goes, people want to hear it from himself, from the man himself, the aura. He radiates confidence, he radiates conviction, he radiates determination to raise India to where it should be. And people love that.
Dr. Rao, if you can hear me, what does this do for the Indian community when they listen to the Prime Minister speak, and also he gives them a clear message that they are actually taking forward India's diplomacy. They are ambassadors of our country. They are the ones who are, in every city. He mentioned the cities by name, bringing in Indianness into to these parts. So it's clearly, I mean, the fact that India, is carrying a certain cultural identity across the world, and an identity that stands for deep values, values that are for peace, also values that are for tolerance and pluralism.
Absolutely, Mark, and it was such sheer joy to listen to the Prime Minister going into such, and I'm sure it must have taken him some effort to make it so people-centric, to actually have all those details well edged out in a very coherent manner, and he makes everybody feel so empowered, right? I mean, at that one person, each one of the people who were there in the room felt empowered. They feel a connection with him, and that's quite exemplary. And I love the way he said that हमने दुनिया को युद्ध नहीं बुद्ध दिए हैं. And I think somewhere this is the real flavor, the quintessential flavor of what people think of India when they think of India, today. And also coming back to more serious things about public diplomacy and how he has been championing this thing. See, several countries have made always sustained efforts, right, to project their own soft power, and especially when it comes to these kind of high-profile visits and the strategic partnership game, etc. And public diplomacy has been an important tool always. It involves, if you look at what it involves, I'm sure Ambassador Bora is the right person to talk about it, but since the question is directed to me, it can be, of course, taken by national government, and it influences, you see, the foreign public opinion and attitudes, and it really plays a role in advancing a country's foreign policy goals, okay? And if you look carefully, these activities are what actually go into making the brand of a nation, So nation branding in today's terms, in today's times, you see this kind of an exercise underway. So diaspora outreach obviously is a part of it. The digital engagement is a part of it. International broadcasting, the different exchange programs, all of these are designed, should be designed to promote a positive image and reputation of the country, to a global audience, especially to its diaspora. And if you carefully see and notice and sort of unpack and analyze how Prime Minister Modi has been literally acing his tours and all these diaspora outreach events that he holds, and all the efforts that he puts in. I mean, it is pretty mind-blowing, the level and the last detail which he works out, the way he speaks and makes that connection. So what all this literature that exists on public diplomacy and all this literature that exists on how do nations brand themselves, right, soft power, etc. You actually see Prime Minister Modi exemplifying it, and that's the reason perhaps why he's so popular all over the world.
Indeed. Ambassador Vora, also the fact that India is the 5th largest economy, going to become the 3rd largest, growing at such a fast pace, and the importance that the diaspora, or let's say the people of Indian origin who live abroad, and the role that they play in pushing India's economy or economic progress also makes it important. After all, a lot of them bring back in investment into the country.
No question about it. Initially, we used to have something called Talk 10, which is transfer of know-how through expatriate nationals, etc. The initial investments that came into India were guided, if one may say so, were shepherded by Indians living there who had access to the big companies and so on. Important thing about the Prime Minister, the term soft power was used. I prefer to call it the soft manifestation of India's hard power. I prefer to call it smart power. But what we are seeing with this man, sir, and I say this with total sincerity, straight from my heart. He does Man Ki Baat, I would rather do Dil Ki Baat. That he is able to remind the diaspora, wherever they are, that there are 3 things that define the new Bharat. First is self-confidence, second is self-esteem, and third is self-reliance. With these 3 comes a sense of pride. For 20 years we don't accept assistance from anybody. Just by way of sidelight, when I was first posted to Paris, 1975, there used to be something called the Aid India Consortium. Austria was a member. This was World Bank had got together 25 countries. They used to help us. So we were trained to ask for assistance for India. Then we were retrained to ask for foreign investment into India, then retrain that Indian companies should be facilitated in acquiring assets overseas. So now it's a mixture of all three, apart from not seeking assistance from anybody, not asking for it, but instead helping 150 countries. He keeps talking about this, keeps reminding them that this is Bharat. Now India has become Bharat. Ab, as he said to some to a group of people, this is, and I'll say it in Hindi, ये वो भारत है जो आंख झुका के नहीं बात करता, आंख उठा के नहीं बात करता, आंख से आंख मिला के बात करता है. What greater message can the leader of 142 crore people give to the diaspora living overseas than that you come from a country that today is one of the biggest, the toughest, the strongest in the world.
Right. And Dr. Rao, so to place India's goals, which the Prime Minister has goals for the next till 2047, when he wants India to become a developed country. So those goals require stability of governance, is what he was trying to say. And the fact that that stability has been seen, and we are also seeing it in terms of how the economy is responding. You know, we've seen that markets are responding very well, stock markets are at all-time highs, and this sort of enthusiasm is also seen in the Indian diaspora abroad. They are also responding to the fact that India is emerging or has emerged as the fastest growing economy in the world.
I mean, India has emerged, and not just right away. I mean, because right now, whenever we speak, our context is always the Ukraine war and the instability perpetrated by the Ukraine war. But also remember that also when you talk about the project of recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, and India was one of the few countries in the world that actually did a pretty decent job. Now, you can argue, and economists have done that part of that success was also coming from the 1.4 billion strong people that we are, and, the way that our consumption cycles are just so numerous. But despite that, you see that, the steps which were taken by the Prime Minister, whether it was, getting into the 2019 review of why our free trade agreement utilization remains low. If you remember when the Modi government had come and when they were prioritizing Make in India, alongside, almost in a parallel, they had also suspended all the bilateral investment treaties and all the other, they had launched a review for why India's FTA utilization remains the lowest in the world, one of the lowest in the world. Because you see, one of the issues with Indian economy has been that even though we have FTAs and we have signed a lot of FTAs, especially in the Congress era, the utilization remains low, which is that we land in situations where we are not to the export advantage, we are always in a trade deficit. And that is why, if you connect that baggage to why the kind of trade deficit we have with China, which is close to $100 billion, and now with Russia, because of all the oil trade, which is $61 billion, is such a problem. So you have to sort of reduce that. So the Prime Minister did not only review the low utilization, in fact, came up with very constructive suggestions as to how do you work on that low FTA utilization, and then from 2021 onwards launched this new age FTAs, which were more about not just trades in goods but also the trades and services, and also landed this first FTA with the so-called developed world, like developed Western economies, which is the EFTA countries, the ECTA that India has signed. Now, why I'm mentioning this is that right now there is also a situation, Mark, that if you look at the last two years, the FDI in India has been declining, and it has been a matter of concern for the government. Now, on the one hand, the global FDI flows have been affected after Ukraine because, of course, it is not easy to de-risk capital because of all the uncertainty in the world. That's one part of it. The other part is that there is also a China plus one diversification which is going on, right? Okay. And you can get into the nitty-gritty of how effective is the China plus one diversification or not. But it is a fact that overall, even though Germany, just that one country, their investments in China have grown, and they give lots of logic as to why it has grown and why it does not mean that the dependence is going to grow. I mean, we can get into that. We are not discussing Germany right now. But what I mean to say is that all the investments that are not going to China, especially from Europe, are actually not able to make their way into India. they are actually landing in countries like Vietnam, countries like Singapore. And that also has been a matter of concern. Now, there are different ways that different domestic, issues at hand, and we are very aware. I mean, the government has been very, very proactive in taking them up. I'm sure if you notice that all the limelight has been on Prime Minister's visit to Russia and then to Austria. But
Right.
Piyush Goyal has already left for or planning to leave for Switzerland, for chalking out how the 100 billion investment are going to come to India. So what I'm saying is that the government is mindful. I think the great thing about the government right now is that it is rooted, it aims very high, the aims are very lofty, but at the same time, it is rooted in a great sense of, I would say, realism, that strategic realism or economic realism, a realistic assessment of its own capabilities and its place in the world. And let's not forget that for India's economic ambitions to fructify, let's not forget that we also require a stable world order. So you see a coherent thread running through all of these, I would say, endeavors by the government, because ultimately, whether you wanted to call it multi-alignment or not, end of the day, of course, multi-alignment is just to make sure that our options are always open in a very fluid world. But end of the day, multi-alignment is not an end, it is a means. What is an end? The end is India's comprehensive national power. And
Okay.
that is where I think the government is very committed to taking us.
Ambassador Vora, we are focusing really on the role played by the Indian diaspora and people of Indian origin. The idea is that for India to achieve its goals, they are playing a significant role as well. And we've not seen in the past a prime minister going out and energizing the Indian diaspora in such a way that India can meet its goals. India is growing at 8+%, the fastest growing country in the world. India's leadership of the G20 has been dynamic, experience. I mean, the rest of the world has watched it and said, yes, this is the way it should be done. So India really is, the people of Indian origin are taking forward something that is the Indian growth story. And clearly it's something that we back home should say that this is something that they are doing well.
Yeah, I believe that as far as the diaspora is concerned, they are certainly energized by the new Bharat, what they are seeing. Comment was made that the investments that are running away from China are going to Vietnam. I'm a development economist. I've been in this business for many years. Every economy has a certain capacity to absorb investment. I'll give you an example, and without meaning to belittle anybody. Put in $300 billion in Bhutan, the economy will collapse. They won't know what to do with it. Similarly, Vietnam has a certain, I've served there, ability to absorb a certain amount of capital. India's ability is much greater. So the figures that I have seen are different perhaps from what you have seen, sir, or others have, that a lot of conversations are taking place that they want to come to India. And it's not necessarily the people who are running away from China. There are others coming to India because of India's inherent strengths. So the diaspora will play an important role in persuading their contacts, their friends, their comrades, that India is the place to invest, because you can trust India not to steal your capital, not to run away with it. Sir, capital is a coward. It'll only go where it feels secure, and capital is greedy. It wants to grow. India offers both assurances to those willing to invest here.
If we take forward also some of the points of India's leadership in the global south,
Yeah.
Ambassador Vora, since you've been a diplomat who served in Africa, how do you see when one looks at the global south, one looks at Africa largely, but of course a lot of countries of Asia are part of the global south,
And Latin America.
So how does India look at its role now as a voice for the global south?
That's a very good question. May I just answer this by saying that the G20 has been around for a long time, 20 years, 25 years, whatever it is, 1997 or so on. The European Union got in, was made a member. They forgot about the African Union. Even when China was the chair of G20 or others were, nobody remembered Africa. We did. We brought them in. The African Union is now a member of G20. And of the 3 countries where I'm privileged to be special advisor in Africa, All of them said, we owe it to India. You have recognized that we exist. And then they say that as far as developmental role model is concerned, India is our choice. My response always is, yehi hai right choice, baby. If you have taken India as your partner, we're not going to let you down. So there's no question about it, sir, that Africa is thrilled that they have a seat at the high table, even if it's 54 countries that account for the African Union, but they're very happy that their voice will now be heard on the high table. One other thing, we've talked about G20, we've talked about Prime Minister's visit, but I believe the real game changer is going to come in October at the BRICS summit, where 30 or 35 or 40 or 100 countries, I don't know. Some people are even saying that this is going to be the new United Nations. And India is one of the founding members. As you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and then South Africa joined lately. Something to watch, and I'm sure you'll be doing programs on that. You'll be covering it because this time it's in Russia, and I'm sure that we'll get a chance to learn a little bit about that. So what we are seeing now is the brave new world that is emerging. We are getting rid of our shibboleths. We are not trapped in the past. We are looking to the future. And India's national power, total national power today, is based on its diplomacy, the best in the world. We are the inheritors of Chanakya, of his thought process. The second is our economic strength. The third is our military strength. And the fourth is our rising national self-confidence.
Right. Dr. Swati Rao, the issues that the Global South are concerned with are food, fuel, fertilizers, that kind of the food, that aspect of security. And these are seen as challenges. In fact, I think Austria was also looking at how, they could, or let's say the West or Europe in a sense can facilitate some of these concerns. What do you look, the fact that India did, the Prime Minister did come from Russia, where, much of these things are actually supplied to the world. How do you see, the need for peace, and perhaps how, or let's say the essence of peace really is required for these challenges to be overcome?
Well, we are living in a world where obviously security is no longer a watertight compartment of hard security, which is that as long as you're not really at war, you are completely safe. That is a very dated and an old perspective. I think from many, many years, we've been trying to broaden and open up the notion of security. And today, anybody worth their salt would say that, of course, security comprises of a wide range of factors, right? Which is a mix of traditional and non-traditional security as well. And talking particularly about the fallouts of the Ukraine war, the 3F crisis has been pretty much on the minds of the Global South, at least. And also, when you say the Global South, I'm sure you mean the developing economies, because Global South also is a loaded word. I was recently at the European, they're having some meeting on something at a conference, and a lot of countries from the developing world actually said that we don't like the term Global South because we don't know how you define the Global South. But of course, beyond the semantics, and I'm sure we are all catching the nuance of what we mean when we say the Global South, we mean the developing economies of the world, okay, which were at one point of time also referred to loosely as the third world. So yeah, we are on the same page. So yeah, the food, fuel, and the crisis, of all this has been a major problem. And one of the reasons why India invokes that kind of confidence in the developing world or the developing economies is also because India has really fought for their rights, whether it's the IMF, the special drawing rights of the IMF, or whether it's about phasing down of fossil fuels versus phasing out of fossil fuels. I think India has always tried to champion the causes of the Global South. So it's not really only decorative, it's not really only superficial, but it is really a genuine concern. And you don't have to go any further. You don't have to look at the West or anybody else to see if it means anything. You have to just ask those countries themselves and see what kind of what kind of an attitude would they have, or what kind of a response would they have towards India and Indian diplomacy and Indian leadership, particularly under Prime Minister Modi. So that's one part. The other part, perhaps, has to, because we are talking about so many things here, about how the war impacts and this and that. I think, or maybe I lost the trail of, I don't know what was the last part of your question. We are hitting midnight here, so I think
Right,
we're all
sure.
a little
No,
jacked. But yeah, what was the other part of your question? I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
I
not
was
able-
talking about peace being essential for the
Oh, yes.
subjects that we've talked about in the global south, all the securities of food, fertilizer, and fuels. Though all these securities need peace at their center. But I'll come back to you, Dr. Rao. Let's listen to what the Prime Minister said on certain subjects, and then we'll focus our discussions on that. The Prime Minister added that we can tell the world proudly that India hasn't given the world war but Buddha. That's what you talked about as well, Dr. Rao. But Prime Minister added that when we talk about Buddha, India actually has always given peace and prosperity to the world.
हजारों वर्षों से हम दुनिया के साथ नॉलेज और एक्सपर्टाइज शेयर करते रहे हैं। हमने युद्ध नहीं दिए, हम सीना तान करके दुनिया को कह सकते हैं हिंदुस्तान ने युद्ध नहीं बुद्ध दिए हैं। जब मैं बुद्ध की बात करता हूं तो इसका मतलब है कि भारत ने हमेशा पीस और प्रॉस्पेरिटी ही दी है। इसलिए 21वीं सदी की दुनिया में भी भारत अपनी इस भूमिका को सशक्त करने वाला है। आज जब दुनिया भारत को विश्व बंधु के रूप में देखती है तो ये हमारे लिए गर्व की बात है।
And also, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in a social media post on X, talked about his visit to Austria. The Prime Minister said, and I quote, "My visit to Austria has been historic and immensely productive. New vigor has been added to the friendship between our nations. I am glad to have attended diverse programs while in Vienna. Gratitude to Chancellor Karl Nehammer, the Austrian government and the people for their hospitality and affection." Well, let's turn once again to Ambassador Deepak Bora. So, Buddh and not Yudh, that is the issue. And of course, people were talking a lot about, at least that was the reference, what Prime Minister did say to the Russian president while he was there. And pretty much the same thing, that this is not the time for war.
He has repeated this constantly. He has driven home the message that we are consistent in terms of our foreign policy objectives. We don't change our policies or our thought processes to suit a particular situation. This, I believe, even though some people might be upset about this, in the short term, in the long term, they'll realize that we mean business. For example, the United States has asked us to try and persuade Shri Vladimir Putin not to obliterate Ukraine. And when we asked them, why don't you talk to them directly, they said, because we've been abusing him. We called him a war criminal and a killer and a murderer, and he should be hauled up before the International Criminal Court, etc., whatever. So they're not going to talk to him, and he's not going to listen to them, which is why I really believe, Mr. Linsa, that a lot of these diplomats from the West should come to our Foreign Service Institute. We train them in the art of diplomacy. We are past masters at this. So we're not in a position where we dislike anybody. For example, again, if you give me half a minute, we engage with the United States. We understand that Russia has issues with the United States, yet we engage with the United States. Russia understands. Russia knows that we have problems with China, yet Russia is buddy-buddy with China. We understand that. We are mature nations. But the bottom line, the message that the Prime Minister has given consistently is that if the world wishes to develop, then we need Shanti, we need world peace. For if there is no world peace, the world with all the nuclear weapons is not likely to remain in one piece. I think this is the bottom line, the basic message that he has been giving.
Right. Dr. Rao, how do you view this in terms of, diplomacy, finding a solution to the conflicts in the world today? not only the one between Russia and Ukraine, but also in West Asia. And all these conflicts are actually, affecting supply chains, and the worst affected, of course, are the global south.
Yes, we live in a world where there's more globalization, which means that we are much more embedded and much more sensitive and vulnerable to supply chain disruptions anywhere in the world. Perhaps this was not the case when globalization wasn't this high. The degree of globalization or the globalized trade wasn't this high, but it of course is how it is today. So yes, that is there. Also, I think we must also sometimes exercise a bit of caution when we are discussing conflicts, because it is also difficult to paint each conflict with the same brush. The reasons for the conflict in Ukraine are very different for example, the kind of issues we are having with China on our LAC, and even though we are always propagating peace, it does not mean that we are negotiating with China from any position of weakness. Okay, so I think that's another responsibility that the Indian leadership has, which is that we are also always speaking in the language in that particular diction, that is very, very peace oriented, but at the same time we mean business and we are very serious. So the thing of not to be taken for granted is something which is very much there. So I think it's pretty much a task of diplomacy and leadership in a fluid world situation. But I just wanted to sort of flag the thing that each of these conflicts have a different context and probably require a different kind of negotiations. Because today, of course, India's engagement with the West are also very important. Just before Prime Minister Modi went to Russia, there was a huge American delegation along with Jake Sullivan and Nancy Pelosi in India. You look at the defense industry cooperations. The two biggest examples that I can give you that have seen a meteoric rise in the last 4-5 years alone is, of course, France and the US. And what is special about these particular defense industry cooperations are the way they are entwined with agreements on critical and emerging tech and AI. Okay, so that is what sort of makes that package so formidable, because today we are in this era of the global military, the security order and the global economic order, but there's another order which is emerging very fast, which is the global digital order. And let me just reiterate that whoever controls the part of the global digital order is actually in effect going to control the large part of the global security and the economic order. And that is the nature of things. And that is why when we today talk about security and economy, we also talk about economic security, and it goes hand in hand. So that's one part. Coming back to people and the role of people and the role of diplomacy. The other thing that India has, and it's a huge advantage, particularly if you're looking at it from a global perspective, is the number of our number. If you look at the forecast, they indicate that by 2050, India's population will be at 1.6 billion. Against China, that will be only 1.32 billion, and 380 million alone in the US. Okay, so with more than 4 times the population, I don't think it will be very hard for India to match the total US economic output. Now, when I say that, of course, there are so many riders attached, I know, but if you look at the sheer size of a population in the global perspective, where most of these populations are actually declining, this is certainly one of our biggest strengths. And from that perspective also, I think engaging the diaspora, having a more coherent policy and sort of aggregating what is the picture of the remittances perhaps that we receive is also important. And this is the beauty of Indian diaspora, because there are about 14,000 Indians living in Russia, and there were about 18,000 Indians living in Ukraine at the time of the war. And even if you remember the unfortunate attack on the children's hospital, you saw there were pictures all over Twitter where Indian students who were studying in Ukraine actually came and helped in all the rescue efforts. Similarly, you have about 20,000 or 30,000 Indians living in Austria. So the point is that all these people are, of course, India's ambassadors in their own way. And I think the Prime Minister has figured that out, that our people are going to be our biggest strength at the end of the day. And you see that all of that effort is, somewhere directed towards that. And as to your original thing about having peace so that all these efforts and all these other issues can be worked out better, well, of course, where is the doubt? I mean, if you look at India's perspective, one of the reasons why we actually exercise multi-alignment and strategic autonomy is because we need the space to engage in a meaningful, constructive manner in all areas of the world. It doesn't mean that we are equidistant, however. That would be a very, very wrong inference to draw from there. But it certainly means that we would like to keep our options open because the nature of the world order is such. And that is the reason why at least the most vulnerable of the of the world population, especially from the emerging economies, etc., find India such a bankable partner, because we do not change our color and tone and tenor. Yes, with depending upon circumstances, we stick to certain things that we find very, very enshrined in the fundamental nature of our being. Yes,
right.
Back to you.
A final question to you, Dr. Ambassador Vora. The idea that this is the digital age after all, and India is using technology to further this kind of good, a peaceful good. And the Prime Minister started his speech today by saying that it's the first visit that he's making to Vienna, and it's the first visit in the 21st century. So when you're looking at 21st century diplomacy, the first visit that an Indian Prime Minister made to Austria in the 21st century. How has diplomacy changed using all these means, digital and everything, in the 21st century to try and achieve India's goals?
The overall goal remains development as far as India is concerned, and this is a digital world. It's the world of nanosecond transfers. It's the digital age. You know this better than I do. This is also the age, as we say, of artificial intelligence, which of course is no substitute for natural stupidity. I hope our friends across the border are listening.
Right.
But what we see today happening, sir, just very short example, 5,500 digital transactions in India every second. 1,400 crore digital transactions in India in May 2024. More in 1 month than the United States does in 3 years. Now, this is the kind of message that is going across to the world, that in the brave new planet that we are constructing, the digital world where physical distances won't mean very much, there the example of India shines like a beacon. India is the shining city on the hill, and people who want to be in the future, who want to have a future that responds to their needs, well, India is your role model as far as the digital public infrastructure is concerned, in which 70 countries have, as of today, borrowed India's model and implemented it in their own nations.
Indeed, and I think that's a good note to end this discussion. Thank you very much, Ambassador Deepak Vora, and thank you also, Dr. Swasti Rao. Thank you for joining us and throwing light on India's larger goals in terms of diplomacy, and especially public diplomacy, in the light of Prime Minister's address to the Indian community in Vienna. I hope you've enjoyed our special coverage of the Prime Minister's visit. The Prime Minister will be emplaning in a short while and returning to New Delhi. He has completed his entire trip, the two-nation tour, both to Russia and to Austria. Thank you very much for watching. Namaskar.